Hello, so today's video is going to be a reroll guide. The upcoming patch seems like it's going to be very focused on low cost units, so I thought now would be a great time to put an all-encompassing little how to play 1, 2, and 3 cost rerolls guide together. For those of you that are less familiar with playing reroll, or if you're newer to the game, this is the guide for you. It's mostly to give you like a general structure as well as a game plan to understand how to play around low cost units and how to convert those into really good positions so that you get the most out of your games of TFT. If you're wondering who I am, basically I have this gaming channel where I upload my own VODs of TFT while I basically go through them with a nice little red squiggly marker and VOD review them and basically try and make pseudo guides that help you to learn how to play the game. I think the best way to learn TFT is to watch somebody just go over a VOD of their game, explain all the things they did right, all the things they did wrong, as well as be like an open area that you can ask questions and stuff like that. Occasionally I'll also do general guides like this video right now, so if you do like these videos as well as the general content that I produce daily, please make sure to like and subscribe. We're working on our sub goal, so it'd be really helpful for me as a small creator as well. So, when should you consider reroll? This will also kind of go over what reroll is in particular. Basically, whenever you're considering reroll, the way that you should always think of it is like, do I have a lot of copies of a low cost unit? Whenever you're playing reroll, the idea is that you're trying to star up low cost units, right? You're trying to make these low cost units into 3 stars, and then you're trying to win the game off of these low cost units being 3 stars. It's a very beginner friendly thing to do because it's also very intuitive and easy. You don't have to plan several steps ahead. A lot of times it's like, hey, I have a lot of copies of this particular unit. Why don't I just keep buying this particular unit until I have them as a 3 star, and then they'll just carry me throughout my game. That's like the reroll in its crux, and it's why it's also like something that's really easy to do and really consistent to climb with. A lot of times, because you're investing your gold really early for a low cost unit, you don't have to worry about like planning for much later in the game, so there's a lot less mistakes you can make. There's a lot less evaluation errors you can make about your position. A lot of times it's like, hey, I'm just gonna spend all my gold now. I'll be strong really early in the game, and it will help me to be really strong into the late game. And a lot of times you can get very good placements. It's very hard to go 8th if you're playing reroll unless you're contested. Now, specifically, even if you have a lot of copies of a units, things that you also have to consider is if you have good items for those units. Because you're investing a lot of gold earlier in the game, because you're playing around low cost units, your items matter a lot more. You can't just hope that you're going to hit items later. If you want to minimize the amount of RNG and variance that you have in your game, you want to make sure that you have the items for your units already. That kind of contributes to the same thing as like augment, for example, right? Like your 2-1 augment has to be really good for a particular reroll comp. You don't want to necessarily have a augment that's like when you reach level 9 get a bunch of gold or something like that, because if you don't hit like augments that help you in the early game, you'll run into problems later in the game. So that's the main thing with reroll that you always have to consider, right? If you're playing a low cost unit, like a 1 or 2 cost units, or even a 3 cost unit, you want to make sure that your items, as well as your units, as well as your augments, like all your early game stuff screams to you, hey, I can reroll this unit, and then it will help me out. There's some rerolls that also have particular conditions, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And the main thing about reroll is that you have to make sure that you're not contested. When you're playing reroll, the whole idea of contesting is like if you're trying to hit a 3-star version of a particular unit, you want to be sure as hell that somebody else isn't also trying to do that. Because if you're both trying to do it, even if it's possible for you both to hit, you're both going to hit so much later than the rest of the lobby that the chances are you're just going to grief each other and you're both going to go bot 4. TFT is a lot about being strong at the right time. If you're not strong at the right periods of time, then you're just going to fall behind the rest of the lobby, and that's how you get into spots where it feels like you're losing all the time and it's unwinnable and you just like lose the game on the spot. Another thing that's really important is that other people are also playing reroll. You should always think about TFT. They talk about like bag sizes and stuff like that. The way you should always think of it is similar to like marbles in a bag, right? If you're trying to grab all of like these units, for example, and somebody else is buying all the other units because everybody's going for 3 stars, what ends up happening is they remove them from the pool. So if they remove like all of this shit, then it makes it a lot easier for you to hit your units. When you're playing reroll, a lot of times if you're playing a particular cost of reroll, let's say you're playing a 3 cost reroll, right? The units cost 3 gold. you're rolling on level 7. If someone else is also playing a 3-cost reroll, it's going to help you hit. You're both going to hit your boards a lot easier because that person's going to buy a bunch of the other 3 costs. Then when you roll your shop, you won't see those 3 costs. You'll buy the ones that you want to buy, and then that person will roll and they won't see your units, and then they'll buy the ones they want to buy, and you'll both hit everything because you'll be able to hit everything. That's why when some patches become very reroll focused, you feel it really aggressively, because what ends up happening is if there's multiple people in the lobby rerolling, like let's say if 4/5 people in the lobby are rerolling, then they're all helping each other to hit their units. So they're all going to be very strong, very fast. And if you're not playing reroll, a lot of times it feels suffocating and overwhelming. So if you look around and lots of people are playing reroll in your lobby, even if you don't have a good spot for a reroll, you probably should angle towards a reroll just to keep up with the rest of the lobby and to match their tempo, match their pacing. Anyways, now let's go over each of the costs of rerolls. So, 1 cost reroll. This is your go-to little guide, and then as we go through the guide, I'll also show you different boards of different 1 cost reroll comps, and we'll talk about them as we go through them, and that's going to be the rest of the guide for the rest of the video. So, 1 cost reroll. The first thing you should know, don't pre-level. What do I mean by that? You don't want to pump any EXP on stage 2. When the game starts, you don't want to go to level 4. The reason you don't pre-level is because you want to stay on level 4 to get the best odds to roll for your 1 cost. What you need is you need units and items on stage 2. You cannot hope that you're going to hit the items later, right? Even if you get hit with like 7 copies of one particular 1 cost, if you have no items for that unit, they're going to do nothing. So you have to make sure that you have both the units as well as the items for the unit. And then the other thing that's really important is econ. A lot of times you're going to sack stage 2. What I mean by that is I mean that you're going to lose streak. So a lot of times you will just make your stage 2, you'll just lose as many rounds as possible on purpose, right? If you need to open your board up, then you'll open your board up, right? You'll play a worse board. You won't slam items, you won't do anything like that. The reason is because you want to guarantee the carousel pick, especially if your items aren't perfect. You want to make sure that you're guaranteeing a good component on carousel. Because you are playing a 1 cost reroll, you need to be strong early. That's a really, really important part. You need to be strong early. Not in stage 2, you need to be strong in like the early mid game into late game, right? You're going to hit your 3 stars. You need to have items for that 3-star. So you want to make sure that you're finding your components as early as possible. So you want to make sure that you're first pick on carousel so you get the components that you need. If you're in a high roll situation, you have more than 50 gold on stage 2, then you can start rolling as long as you're not breaking econ, because you want to prioritize making as much econ as possible. And then what you're going to do is you're going to roll on level 4 to 30 gold on stage 3-1. 3-1, if you do not pre-level, and you don't take any augment that gives you EXP, on 3-1 you'll still be level 4, and you'll maximize as much econ as you can. You'll then roll down as much of this gold as possible to try and hit the 3 stars that you need. Ideally, on 3-1, you are hitting all the 3 stars that you want to hit, because that way you will then win all of stage 3, and then stage 4, and the rest of the game you can cap out your board depending on what board you're playing. There's different ways to cap that out, which we'll talk about in a second. Another note is that if your board relies on some 2 costs, because a lot of 1 cost boards also use 2 costs while they're rerolling, don't roll too deep on 3-1, because you'll need that gold to roll on level 5, level 6 in order to hit the other units. So now let's go over some 1 cost reroll boards. So this is a really common one. This is Warwick reroll. So Warwick reroll, typically, I have 2 Warwicks here. These are 2 different builds. This one's the one with Vampiric Scepter. A lot of times, you play this comp specifically if you have Vampiric Scepter. It is a huge enabler and is really contingent to play Warwick reroll. So what you'll do is you'll take Vampiric Scepter. It gives you a bunch of Omnivamp and attack speed. Then you'll make a Gwinsu and a Rage Blade. The reason Vampiric Scepter is so good on Warwick, because if you read its ability, it gives you a bunch of stats, and then the user cannot cast their ability anymore. If you read Warwick, Warwick doesn't have an ability. Warwick has just a passive, so it actually only benefits Warwick. Comparatively, there's some other units that Vampiric Scepter is good on, but because it removes your ability, it actually doesn't have a downside on Warwick, so it actually works out really, really well. When you're playing Warwick reroll, you're always going to play 6 Vanguard. 6 Vanguard is really, really important. There's sometimes where you end up playing Vertical Frost with the Warwick reroll. It's just that you lose a lot of your tankiness. With the Warwick, you really want him to live long enough such that he stacks up the Gwinsu, so he just like absolutely deletes the whole board and runs around and kills everything. So A lot of times Vampiric Scepter is the safe way to play it. The stats also say that it's really good without Vampiric Scepter, especially since now Vanguards are getting buffed in the next patch. There's a lot of times where you can actually just play for Warwick. When you actually just play Warwick without the Vampiric Scepter. I think if you don't have Vampiric Scepter, I think QSS is a little bit awkward to play around. I've seen people put Sterix instead of QSS. I've seen people put other damage items instead of QSS, just because it helps the Warwick a lot more to do more damage rather than to have the anti-stun effects of the QSS, because you lose a lot of that damage that you would have otherwise had with the Vampiric Scepter. When you're rolling for Warwick, typically you'll also try and be efficient. You'll buy other 1 costs. The more 1 costs that you buy, the easier it is to hit the other 1 cost, because you're thinning out the pool, right? You thin out the pool by buying multiple copies of the same units, as well as multiple copies of the same cost of units. So whenever you're playing, you'll typically cap out around Frost with the Olaf and the other Vanguards. But when you're rolling, a lot of times like your early game board will look something like this, where you'll just play 4 Vanguard, and then eventually you'll put in Frost, and you'll roll for Blitzcrank 3, Twitch 3, and Warwick 3. Because this comp really only relies on Warwick being the sole carry for much of the game, what you would want to do is you would want, like, if you hit Warwick 3, don't stay on level 4, level 5, and roll to 0 looking for Blitzcrank 3 or Twitch 3. I think it's really important is that you always want to stay above 30 gold, right? If you saw when I was talking around here, I said on roll on level 4 to 30 gold. The only time you ever want to drop below 30 gold is if you're like 1 off of a 3-star. 30 gold is like that good interval where it'll allow you to make econ back really easily, because 30 gold will make it really easy in 1 turn. You'll be able to make 40 gold in most cases, and then from there you can make 50 gold, and then you're reestablish your econ, so you're generating 5 gold per turn based on interest. So you never want to drop below 30 gold, because it has like long-term ramifications for the rest of your game, where you just will be so far behind the lobby because they'll just have so much more gold than you if they're making econ and you're not. Anyways, so that's the Warwick version. This is a older board that might get updated a little bit. This is Zoe reroll. So typically you go for Zoe 3, Poppy 3, and Lilia 3. With Zoe, typically you want blue buff on her and Nashers, but you can arrange the items differently. I've seen her do well with many different types of AP builds, and this was the old way that you would build the board. This board also works similarly as an RE reroll board. So when you're rolling for this board, especially if you're going to have items for Ari, you might not want to roll on level 4. You might want to also roll a little bit on level 5. This is an example of a board that caps out really high with a 2-star. So you want to be very, very careful not to over-roll too deep to looking for Zoe 3, because eventually you probably want to hit Ari 3 as well. There is going to be a Bastion buff coming up, so there is a chance that you end up playing something like this, where you just play 6 Bastions with this type of setup as well. I'm not sure yet. This usually isn't the way that it's built. Usually you just play the Rise and the Taric for Portal and everything else. This line is getting a little bit of a buff. It used to be very, very meta. It used to be very like very commonly built and commonly played, and it kind of fell off a little bit, and now they buffed a lot of the units that are part of this comp, so it might come back into being one of those meta comps again. You can delay making Shred a little bit because Zoe has built-in Shred. So you can start by making anti-heal, and then you can worry about making a Spark and a Shiv later. And then Poppy and Lilia will have your general tank items. So you usually roll for Zoe, Poppy, Lilia. After you hit that, you might roll for RE3 if you have items for RE3. And if not, then you just push levels to try and get the Taric and the Ryzen, and then play this board. Likewise, here's another board that you can play. This is the Ziggs reroll board. So this one actually is getting a little bit of a nerf. There was a bug with Honeymancy in general that just got removed, so apparently the damage numbers were a bit inflated for the comp. So there's a chance that this comp isn't as strong as it used to be, especially since Blitzcrank is also getting a nerf. But typically what you'll do is you'll reroll for Cassio 3, Ziggs 3, Poppy 3, and Blitzcrank 3. The main ones that you want to hit are Blitzcrank and Ziggs. So if you hit Blitzcrank 3 and Ziggs 3, you can then start pushing levels. You don't have to worry about hitting the Poppy 3 or the Cassio 3. They can come in due time later. Ziggs, typically you want blue buff. I think Nashor's JG is what I usually like to build. It's just for item economy. I think Rabadon's is probably better than JG, but of course you just want a little bit of attack speed, and then like his basically the way Ziggs works is he sends like the little bomb thing, and then it explodes and does a huge amount of damage. So you want to try and build him to like one shot. A lot of times you'll try and position your Ziggs towards the middle, The middle just cuts the amount of travel time that you have to go because he shoots the furthest target. If you put him in the corner, it's going to take a really long time for his bullet to travel. So usually you put him in the middle and you try and position him such that, like, you know, if either middle left or middle right to try and target the enemy carry first. So, like, you know, if their enemy carries on this side, you'll put him middle left, and if enemy carries on this side, you'll put him middle right. And then Blitzcrank, you don't want to make like stuff like Steadfast Heart. Honeymancy works by the amount of damage that you take, so you don't want damage reduction items. So Warmog is really good on him because basically that just increases health. And then Spark, obviously, and Stone Plate, if you're trying to make Blitzcrank a solo frontline unit, is pretty good as well. If you have items for Cassio, typically she just likes attack speed, but there's many other builds. This comp also works really, really well with Ornn artifacts. You can check out a guide on my channel where I talk about that as well. Another 1-cost reroll that you can play is Jax and Ashe reroll. So Jax Ashe reroll. Ashe is actually getting buffed a little bit, and I felt like this comp was already very strong even in the last patch. So I do expect this one to be very prevalent. Jax usually likes to have AP frontline items, but his items are very flexible. If you read his ability, he scales a lot off AP. His AP gives him armor, and then his armor gives him bonus magic damage. So everything kind of like self-sustains himself in like an awkward, really cool way. So you could basically build him tank items and he'll do great. You can build him AP tank items. Those are typically the best ones that just give him a bunch of AP because they'll transfer over to being additional armor and MR as well anyways. But you don't really prioritize Jax time. Typically you're just trying to make it so that you have double Gwynsu on Ashe. Things like anger issues, the augment where you just get everything as Gwynsu, also works really well with this comp. You'll notice this is also the multi-striker comp. Something that's fallen out of favor a little bit is that you can actually reroll for Kassadin 3 as well as Akali 3. That used to be the old multi-striker reroll ways. And then you're always going to play 7 multi-striker because it's just so much value for your whole team. So eventually, you know, your early game will look something like this. And then eventually you will try and push levels to fit in the extra multi-strikers to get in all the extra units. Until you have all the multi-strikers, by the way, you can also play Chrono for a lot of your mid game because Chrono gives you passive healing, which helps out, and it can give your Jax a lot of sustain as well. Another 1-cost reroll that we can go through. There's a lot of 1-cost rerolls. There was a lot of 1-cost reroll buffs, so we're just going through it. This is Namzi reroll. Namzi, you just want to build him with as much AD items as possible. His scaling is significantly higher on his AD than his AP, so you just want to make sure that you give a Last Whisper, an IE, and then maybe a Deathblade, you know, as many sword items as possible on your Namzi. Namzi just got buffed, and this whole line basically got buffed, so I expect this to be very, very meta come tomorrow or come Wednesday, whenever the patch gets released. If you think Elise and Jace also got buffed a lot, so a lot of times you will roll for an early game board where you're going for Jace, Namzi, Twitch, Shyvana, and Elise. Shyvana is pretty important, then you can just play towards Vertical Dragon. This is also the Draconic Mastery reroll board. It's very similar. And then late game, if you're playing Namzi and you have 3 items on Namzi, you just want 3 Dragon in to get the Namzi Dragon bonus to do even more damage. A lot of times your early game board will look something like this, where you'll just play 4 Shapeshifter, and you will just the Twitch isn't as important. I find that the Twitch very rarely does anything important on the team, especially like this unit just always lets me down. So a lot of times you're just going to roll for Namzi, and then Shyvana is pretty important, but if you had Jace 3 and Elise 3, a lot of times you can push levels off of those and you'll be fine anyways. Shyvana, if you're making her like a primary damage dealer, I think AP tank item like a Crown Guard is really good. I know Crown Guard just got nerfed, but I think it would still be a really good item on her. And then Spark and Warmogs are just very good to get those Shapeshifter synergies, as well as to get some extra damage dealing on her. If she's not like a damage dealer for you and she's more of just a tank, then you can replace the Spark with another better tank item if Namzi is going to be your main damage dealer. If you're playing Draconic Mastery, though, it's typically Spark, because Draconic Mastery Shyvana is going to do as much work as the Namzi. Anyways, so those were the 1-cost rerolls. So there was a couple boards there that had a couple 2-costs on them. You could treat those boards that I showed you as 2-cost rerolls for all intensive purposes as well. So things like RE reroll, for example. I think I deleted it already, so I won't bring it up again. But anyways, when you're thinking about a 2-cost reroll, your stage 2 is a little bit less important, because you have time to plan on stage 2 to prepare for stage 3. So what you typically want is you want units and items on stage 2, because you want to have direction that leads you towards this reroll comp, or else you wouldn't be committing towards it anyways. You can either econ on stage 2, or you can play the strongest board. I prefer to play the strongest board. The main thing you should always think about with reroll is strong early. That's the big thing. So you always want to be as strong as possible early game. If you're not sacking for a particular component on carousel where you have a use to lose streak the early game, then you should just try and play a strong board. It does not matter if you win streak or lose streak, because the more HP that you have, the greater your chance of not losing out late game. A lot of reroll boards get out capped by like legendary boards and upgraded forward costs and all of these things. That's just a natural aspect of TFT, right? When you're investing a bunch of gold into a low cost unit, the unit costs very little gold. It wouldn't be fair if your 1 cost reroll board or your 2 cost reroll board was an instant first every single time, because then everybody would just play reroll and then it's a very degenerate patch. So just inherently, if someone is able to make it to an upgraded 5 cost or upgraded 4 cost, a lot of times your board will start to fall off late game. The main benefit of playing reroll is that because you're spiking on early, like in stage 3, right? Because you're rolling a lot of gold on stage 3 and not on stage 4 or stage 5, you're going to have more HP to work with. And that's why you should always be playing a board that is as strong as possible early, because then you'll just bleed out and get a easy top 4 by just bleeding out to the top 4 instead of just like high rolling all the time and just being like top 1. That's like the whole idea with reroll. It's more consistent. But anyways, you're going to send it on 3-1 or 3-2 for upgrades. So what do I mean by that? Basically, on 3-1 or 3-2, you're going to roll down to try and hit a 2-star. Not a 3-star, right? Because it's a 2-cost reroll. It's more expensive. You're going to hit a 2-star versions of those units. And you're going to stay level 6 for rolling. So either on 3-1 or 3-2, it's typically going to be on 3-2. That's a better leveling interval for you to level 6. And when you have these 2 stars, you're basically going to be more stable than most of the lobby. A lot of the lobby, they either have to high roll to find upgrades, or they have to roll to find upgrades. If you're rolling to find upgrades, typically you're committing towards a reroll because you're using the gold that you otherwise would use to level and then roll on level 8. You're using it to roll on level 6. You're always going to roll on level 6 if you're rolling for 2 costs, because it's just important to do that. And then you're going to roll above 50 gold on stage 3 for those copies. You're going to reestablish your econ after your roll down on 3-1, 3-2 for upgrades, and you're going to reestablish that to 50, and then you're going to slow roll 50. Once you get to stage 4, you're going to resend it, right? You resend it and you roll till 30, and basically you can roll deep for the 3 stars now. When you start stage 4, that's when you expect to hit the 3 stars. If you hit them earlier than that, you're high rolling. If you hit them much later than that, you're low rolling. But usually around the early parts of stage 4, like 4-1, 4-2, 4-3, that's when you expect to hit all of the 3 stars that you require. And then for the rest of the game, you're going to econ and then cap out your board, right? Cap out your board. There's different ways to cap out your board depending on what the board is. So for example, this was the board I just showed you. A 2-cost reroll board that's pretty common is Honeymancy. Now, Honeymancy, we already showed as a 1-cost reroll. I've just put 5 Honeymancy here with Vertical Arcana. I'm not sure exactly how the board's going to shape out because there are a couple Honeymancy changes that are happening. But a lot of times, Honeymancy, if you just hit all of the 3 stars, is very strong. It's also very strong with certain augments like Best Friends and 2 Tanky. A lot of times, you just play Vertical Honeymancy with Arcana, and then whichever a 3-star you hit, so for example if you hit Kog'Maw, then you will just play a Hunter, right? You will find a Hunter to play to give Kog'Maw the Hunter synergy, and then you'll just play 5 Honeymancy with these setups. When you're rolling for this board, a lot of times you're just rolling for something that looks like this. These are like the 6 units that you play a lot of the time. And then you're prioritizing around Nunu 3 and Kog'Maw 3, and then Kog'Maw likes bow items that help him to cast a lot. You can also put Shojin on Kog'Maw if Kog'Maw's not your primary carry, but at the same time you can also play around Ziggs and Vigor, and then based on whichever one you hit first is the one that you can build your board around. This isn't the best 2-cost reroll. I just wanted to talk about Kog'Maw because Kog'Maw was very popular as a reroll comp before. He was the face of 2-cost reroll, but the comp is just not played as much anymore. The old comp used to look something like this, which you probably remember. It was basically this, Lilia and Rumble. This was like the old 2-cost reroll because as you can see, you're rolling very efficiently for multiple 2 costs, and you would be Kog'Maw Tristana. Because they did the change to Fairy, this comp is very unstable, especially on level 6. Because before you would be able to play this board on level 6, and it would be very, very strong and very, very stable. So it's just a lot worse to play around this board than it is to just play Vertical Honeymancy and juice the Kog'Maw a little bit more, because you just don't have Tristana items a lot of the time. Now we can talk about Syndra reroll. So Syndra, there's a couple Syndra. Syndra used to be like the broken comp as well. Syndra with Cassiopeia has been a common reroll. A lot of times you'll play this comp with 2 tanky. By the way, 2 tanky with Shapeshifters is really, really strong. The same like the other reroll, the Kog'Maw reroll. But basically just play Vertical Shapeshifter to try and get this Cassiopeia to ramp up as much as possible. Double Guinsoo and Archangel is something that I had a lot of fun with, but a lot of times you'll see Double Guinsoo with a Gunblade just because it works really well to sustain the board. Syndra is somebody who's very conditional. If you read Syndra's abilities, she basically requires scaling. Every 15 casts, or sorry, every 30 casts, she gains an additional rift that does extra damage. After 15 casts, she does a little bit of shredding, so you can actually delay making shred, and a lot of times you'll want to make anti-heal. So a lot of times you'll see Syndra items be something like Shojin Nashor's red buff. But especially if you don't start the game with a Syndra, and you don't start the game off with good Syndra items, you cannot play this comp. The problem with Syndra is that she needs to scale. If you do not scale her starting from round 1, the earliest game, your earliest game scaling the Syndra, then she's not going to do much late game, and this comp is going to fall very, very flat. This comp is very playable. I played it and I top 4'd last patch with it, and I made a video about my opinions on it. You can even check out that video and see a guide on how to play Syndra reroll, because I talk about it a lot. So it is definitely playable. You just have to have, there's a big condition here of having Syndra early and having Syndra items early. You can't pivot into Syndra reroll. But when you're rerolling, you're typically going to roll for Shyvana 3, Cassio, and Syndra. Now, this is like one variation of the comp. One that I think is going to be more prevalent is this one. There is going to be a lot of buffs to Vanguards. Mordekaiser is getting a little bit of buff. 4 Vanguards getting a little bit of a buff. So I expect to see this variation being more common. This is the 4 Vanguard variation. So you can roll for Galio 3, Rumble 3, and Syndra 3. But a lot of times you're going to be rolling a little bit hybrid, like between level 6 and level 7, because Mordekaiser 3 is going to be a big deal on your team. And then Mordekaiser, just because he does a good amount of damage as well. His damage is getting a little bit nerfed, so that's something to take note of. But you're building like AP frontline items on him, things that make him cast, because he gets a lot of shield value. You just want him to cast and have that shield so that he has a good survivability. But general tank items are also going to be fine on the Mordekaiser. If you're not playing around Cassiopeia, because you're rolling for other units, and if Cassiopeia is contested, a lot of times you just play Karma with Vex, because then you can fit in the Eldritch Mage combo with the Nami on level 8, and this board is very, very stable because Chrono also gives you some passive healing for your whole team, which can help out with most of those units. Another 2-cost reroll that you can play is Akali and Nyla reroll. So Akali Nyla reroll doesn't really have too many conditions. Warriors are very strong. Typically when you're playing Warriors, a lot of times people will just play it when you're playing 6 Warrior. 6 Warrior is a lot stronger, and it requires you to get some more high cost units like Fiora and Gwen and those type of units. However, Akali and Nyla are both getting buffed in the next patch, so this might be one of the more prevalent boards nowadays. This comp hasn't really been popular because when they changed Fairy from 2 to 3 Fairy, you now no longer get a Katarina item for free. Before, it was very common for you to roll for Akali Nyla as well as Katarina, and Katarina got a free item, which was really good for your item economy. Now it's going to be a very long time before you get the Fairy crown, so it's often really difficult to play around this board in particular. But when you're making Nyla, here I just put them all with Hodges. Bloodthirster is also fine. When you think about Akali, you should always think about one-shot potential. So Hodge with Infinity Edge is really, really strong. I really like to make Deathblade on Akali. I think that Akali, the biggest problem with her is that sometimes she'll dive like a backline unit. She won't kill them, and then she'll run away, and then she'll die after running away. She also dives the backline unit, and sometimes she just like deletes herself by accident because she doesn't have de-aggroing. So you have to make the judgment call based on like whether or not you think your Akali can one-shot somebody or not. If you think your Akali has enough damage and scaling that she can one-shot somebody, then you don't have to put Edge of Night on her. But Edge of Night obviously is one of her best items, because then if she dives the back line and she's about to die, she'll have a second lease at life. But a lot of times you want to make like IE Hodge just to give her like that burst damage that she can hopefully like kill a unit when she dives them. Nyla also works really well with IE. I've seen different builds with her. I put Hodge IE here, but you can also replace the Hodge with a Bloodthirster. Sterix also works well. Unleash the Beast works really well with this comp. Everybody gets Unleash the Beast value. So you could do stuff like that. Here at Fiora, you can also play Gwen. You can also pivot this into a 6 warrior setup. If you have a warrior crest, you can reroll the Nyla and Akali, and then you could put in Gwen and play around like everybody else in addition to that. It also works out really well. So that's 2 cost rerolls. Finally, this is going to be the last part of the video. This is just going to be 3 cost rerolls. So with 3 cost rerolls, 3 cost rerolls play more like a 4 cost board. I know that sounds really weird, but like the tempo of it is very similar to a 4 cost. So if you're familiar with playing 4 cost, that's how 3 costs kind of feel. It's a lot of like prepping for later in the game, because you're not going to roll very early for these units because they are more expensive. So you have to make it to like level 7 usually to roll. So what you're going to do is usually you need some sort of direction on stage 2. Like if you start with 1 or 2 copies of a 3 cost unit, usually that's a good indicator of I'm in a good spot here. The way you should always think about 3 cost reroll is most of game 2-star, right? You're not going to hit the 3-star instantly. You're not just going to get a 3-star and bang, you have a 3-star and you win the game. Most of your game is going to be spent with the 2-star copy of that unit. So if you start the game off with 1 or 2 copies of a unit, you're very close to getting to that stabilization point, and that's what makes it a really good spot and gives you a lot of direction early game. Your items don't matter necessarily as long as you have some good components that can make use of it. So for example, if you're trying to play around Vigor and you have like a tier to start, you might not have blue buff, or you might not have like the best items for him. But if you already start with some components, like if you start with a rod and a tier, it's like, okay, I can make those into Vigor items, have the rest of the game to plan this out. I might angle myself towards mages this game. That's what I mean by like your opening spot. You can play Econ or play the strongest stage 2. This is what I was saying. You can either play strongest to preserve HP, or you just sack all of stage 2 in order to get the carousel pick to get a better item. Both of them make sense. It depends on the rest of your lobby. If the lobby seems like it's going to be very out of hand very fast, you might want to preserve HP on stage 2 and just play as strong a board as possible. Then, like the 2 cost reroll, if you have upgrades. So this is a big if paired. If you are paired, let's say you have 2 copies of a unit, then it makes sense to roll a little bit on stage 3-1 or 3-2. Like I said, you never roll below 30 gold. Make that a habit. Never roll below 30 gold. But if you are paired, you can roll for the upgrade, because then if you upgrade them, you'll have a very easy game on stage 3 because you'll have your upgraded unit with items. Whenever you can, you level to 7. Typically, this will be around on stage 4-1, but if you have a lot of gold and if you're in a really good spot, you can start rolling earlier during stage 3 and just level to 7. You always want to roll above 50 gold on stage 3. You don't want to sacrifice your econ too badly unless you're in like dire straits. If you're like 1 life or 2 lives, like the whole game's going bad, everything's miserable, then yes, of course, roll your gold. Don't just like sit there and die. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, like, if you have the option, you always want to be rolling above 50 gold. And then you're going to resend it. So on 4-1, you would need the upgrades. So if you don't have the upgrades already, the chances are you're probably going bot 4 anyways because you didn't have a good spot, because you didn't start with enough copies of them. But you need to roll on 4-1, and then on stage 4 you can roll deep if you're close to a 3-star. That's a very high roll position, but a lot of times it's going to be on stage 5 that you actually hit your 3 stars. That's just the way things work out a lot of the time. So a lot of the best 3 cost reroll boards are the ones that are stable on stage 4 with just the basic upgrades. And then for the rest of the game, you're gonna econ and cap out your board. So these ones are going to be probably a little bit more meta. One of the 3 cost rerolls is if you're playing around Katarina, you can play around Katarina, but I don't necessarily recommend this one. There's been a lot of buffs to Vanguards. There's been buffs to Hue as well. So I think that the 4 Vanguard, 4 Blaster comp is going to be back into the meta. So this is a comp where, as you can see, there's 7 units. You have 4 Blaster, 4 Vanguards. Vanguards are getting buffed. So this is something that's going to help. 4 Vanguard got buffed. Galio got buffed. Rumble got buffed. And basically, this board is very, very expensive, so you have to have a very, very good spot for it. But basically, all your AD items could go on Ezreal. I think double IE is really, really strong on Ezreal. Just IE has an effect that if you have extra crit chance, then you get extra crit damage. So it makes sense to just build double IE on some of these units that are trying to one-shot. But Hui, typically you want blue buff and Nashers and then some sort of AP item. You can also put Morello on Hui if you don't have anti-heal. That also works out fine. But typically you're just going to play Blasters as your backline. Rumble has the Blaster synergy, so you can actually build this as a front line. The old way to play this comp, you would cap out around Xerath true damage, because a lot of times when you're rerolling, you will buy charms. That's something that I didn't really put in the guide. But whenever you're rolling, right? Whenever you're rolling, excuse me, you can buy charms. This is another way that rerolls are very consistent. A lot of times you're gonna roll 2 or 3 times per round anyways, so what you can do is every single turn when you're above 50 gold and you're trying to hit copies of your units, you can roll for the charms. You roll, you buy a charm every single turn. It ensures that your board is as strong as possible. You preserve HP, you continue with that idea of being strong early and then bleeding out into your placement. So, and then by buying the charms, you also get extra added effects that can help you. Like sometimes it's reroll your shop, sometimes it's duplicators, things like that. You can mill the deck for things that can help you to actually like convert your reroll board into like a very strong board as well. That's something specific for this set that you should also note. When you're playing reroll, because you're going to be rerolling a bunch and you're going to be rolling on these levels, you can pick up charms along the way. Obviously, if you're too broke for charms, I wouldn't recommend it, but in most cases, you're going to buy as many charms as possible, which I was going to talk about in a second anyways when we talk about mages, but we'll get there when we get there. Mordekaiser, you'll just put general tank items on. Basically, they don't have to be perfect items. All the AP items can go on Hui. AD items can go on Ezreal. You could play Varus, but you can also play Tristana. I think the best way to cap this board out now is to play around 6 Blaster. If you can level and play 6 Blaster, like if you make it to level 9, then you can play 6 Blaster. If you do not have 6 Blaster in, then a lot of times you can just play Arcana and get some sort of Arcana bonus on level 8. For example, like a Hecarim would be really nice, because then you can either get the Tahm Kench or the Hecarim value. But this board used to be like somewhat strong, then it wasn't very strong. The main thing with these is that you really want to have other people rolling for other 3 costs, because it relies you to hit Ezreal 3, Hui 3, and Mordekaiser 3 in a lot of the cases. It's a very expensive board to play, so unless people are playing rerolls, this board will be very hard to hit. And then you might find out that you just like end up like a 5th or a 6th because you just never make it to Ezreal 3 or Hui 3 or Mordekaiser 3. Another common board is the Jinx reroll board. Typically, Jinx, you're playing Wukong, and then you're playing 4 Hunter with Preservers. Preservers got nerfed now, so I'm not sure if it's always going to be a Preserver board that you're playing, but this is the old way that you played the board. If you have extra items, you can also put them on Olaf and itemize Olaf as another carry. You can also go for Kog'Maw 3 and itemize Kog'Maw as an additional carry as well. But basically, when you're playing this board, what you'll do is you'll just make an attack speed item on Jinx, as well as some other general damage items. Here I just put the utility items on Jinx, because if you're low on items, you want to put maximum utility on here, and then you'll itemize your Wukong as well. Wukong has changed over the time. If you're spin to win, you definitely want to put like damage items. Like this is specifically for spin to win Wukong. Spin to win Wukong is one of the best augments in the game right now, so if you hit spin to win, you should pretty much always just play a board like this and just absolutely destroy and win the game for free. Finally, we get to mages. Sorry, my music stopped. With mages, this is the big one that I think most people are going to be playing on the patch. They said that they're going to be keeping an eye out for it. There's been so many buffs to this comp right now, I don't even know why, because I felt like this comp was always strong. But typically what you're doing is you're hitting Vigor 3 and Vex 3. Vex, you usually want a solo frontliner. She gains more shielding if she has more enemies targeting her. So a lot of times you don't want to, like, you know, put a bunch of units around the Vex. You'd like Vex to just tank. And she's very tanky, and she also got buffs at her low cost version, so she's going to be really, really strong come Wednesday. And a lot of times you'll just make Spark on her because it's really good value for your entire team. Gargoyle and then some sort of AP item like Crown Guard is really good on her because it helps out with her shielding. But of course you can put whatever tank items that you can make on her because she's pretty flexible with those items. As long as you can get her shield to proc as much as possible with Mage, she'll be really strong. Vigor, you always want to have blue buff Nashers. Of course, And then Vigor scales off buying charms. So a lot of times you will play Vigor and you will try your best to buy as many charms as possible. What that means is that while you're rolling, similar to other rerolls, you're incentivized to buy the charms as much as possible, because he scales his AP. Now, there's different ways to cap out this board. A lot of times you do want to play 7 mage, but that's something you can usually only do if you make it to level 8 or level 9. If you're not playing 7 mage, you can also roll for Mordekaiser, because he gives a little bit of a Vanguard synergy, and he could work as an extra frontline unit. You can play an extra Chrono unit in a lot of cases because of Vex. So a Chrono frontline unit could help out a lot as a one-off. One of the main ways that people cap out this board is by playing Arcana. So with Arcana, you get Xerath that also scales off charms, right? Xerath's Arcana bonus is that you get bonus true damage if you buy a bunch of charms. So this tries really well with the Vigor. So a lot of times you'll play a board that looks like this, and then you'll always put the Yuumi on the Vigor. Vex doesn't really need the Yuumi healing and the Yuumi passive. But the Yuumi on the Vigor is very, very strong, because it makes it so that the Vigor just can't randomly get one shot, and he also gets extra damage. And then your utility items will typically go on the Nami, which you'll eventually hit on level 7. But anyways, that was the guide. Hopefully it was informative. I showed a couple, sprinkle in some inspirational boards that you can try out for yourself. Of course, like TFT is very dynamic, so a lot of these boards might change and things might get adjusted, but hopefully it was still enjoyable. And just take it as like the general guideline, right? I didn't really talk much about buying charms at the beginning of the video, but make sure that you buy charms as you're rerolling, and then you go through your 1, 2, and cost rerolls. Make sure that you're buying at the right intervals to make sure you're the strongest as possible in your early and mid game. Right, you want to win stage 3 with all of these comps. You want to win stage 3, right? Winning stage 3 is the most important thing. You want to make sure you're as strong as possible during stage 3. If you are strong in stage 3, you will probably get a top 4. That's typically how rerolls go. If you are very weak on stage 3, then the chances are you're in a really bad spot for that reroll, and you haven't hit many upgrades, or the comp is actual dog shit, and then you shouldn't be playing it. But anyways, thank you for watching. Hope that was enjoyable. And have a great day. And hopefully tomorrow is a fun day for a new patch. I'm excited that maybe things will be different. Instead of like feeling like I've been playing the same comps for like a month straight. But thank you and have a great day. Bye bye.